All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the last chapter in this particular unit. Talking about terrestrial biomes specifically, we're going to focus on forests first and then talk about some other stuff later on here. But to begin with, forests, threats to forests, issues with forests, types of things about forests. So first of all, the best and when I say best, the most biodiverse forests out there are called old-growth forests. These are the pinnacle, they're climax communities. So original forests that haven't been messed with, they haven't been logged, there's been no roads built through them, there's been no development in them. These are ones that have tons of biodiversity in them. Lots of different species with specialized niches. They're extremely important. Think of them like the tropical rainforest or the coral reefs of their world, and so they're really important. 36% of the world's forests fit into this category of old growth. They're sometimes known as primary, ancient, virgin, or primeval forests. And so they're important to pay attention to, and we need to take care of these guys. So if you look in the United States at the old growth forests, everything in black here. So this is back in 1620. So back when the U.S. was really just getting underway. And you see there's old growth forests all over this country. It started thinning out by 1850s when we started populating, especially along the East Coast and stuff over here where we first settled. And then by 1926, look how sparse it is, especially over here. And then from then, of course, logging started getting established and stuff on the West Coast. And by 1990, look how little old growth we have. We have some concentrated in Wyoming, some in the Bighorn Mountains right there, and then in Yellowstone where they didn't allow tree cutting because it was a national park. There's spots in Montana, there's some spots in California and Washington, some spots down here in the southern part of the United States. Very, very few spots on the East Coast. There's just barely any old growth left. We've cut it all down. We've used it for lumber. And so what makes up the vast majority of this now is what we call second growth forests. These are ones where we've cut down. So this tree represents one of those old growth forest trees. You see it's been cut down, and there's all these other plants now that are growing in, trees and ferns and stuff like that are replacing it after a major disturbance. Could be a fire, could be insects, and in the United States a lot of it's been timber harvesting. And so 60% of the world's forests are these second growth forests. And so it's basically the area is being reclaimed by secondary succession. That process that we talked about where there was an ecosystem there and now there's one coming back. It can be small shrubs and trees. But we don't see any of these big beautiful old trees in these areas anymore. In addition to that, there's also been a movement to make more and more of these things, tree plantations or tree farms. And the reason why is people start harvesting them. You see these beautiful little rows of all the same identical tree in it. So they plant these stands of trees. One particular species that they maintain, take care of, and harvest just like they would a farm crop. And a lot of these are used for making paper and particle board. Almost all the particle board and paper on the planet, in the United States anyway, comes from these tree plantations where they've cleared it out, they've cut it down, and then there's this cycle of growing and regrowing, 15 to 20 year cycle to make paper products and things along those lines. Good in some ways, bad from a biodiversity perspective. So why do we care about trees? Why do they matter to us? Well, two numbers right here. Economically speaking, trees provide us with $1.8 trillion a year in services. And that's in the way of firewood, lumber for growing things, paper, mining, jobs, recreation, and livestock. So there's a lot of things that we use trees for, and it makes us a lot of money. But look how much bigger this number is. These are the estimates of what the trees do for us from an ecological point of view. They support energy and chemical recycling. They reduce erosion. They absorb excess water. They purify and clean the air and the water. They regulate climate. They absorb carbon from the atmosphere, and they give wildlife habitats, up to 4.7 trillion. So they play vital roles, and so we need to watch them and take care of them, especially as you can see in that earlier picture, how little old growth we have. We need to manage our forests wisely. And so some of the issues with foresting, one of the biggest issues is when we divide or cut in a new area through the middle of a forest. Building roads is one of those primary things that we do. What it does is it gives us access to areas that haven't had access before. But what it does is it sets you up for increased amounts of erosion. It splits animals on the sides now, and that we've fragmented species now. What if there were deer over here and deer over here? Now they interact with each other far less, and that creates its own little pickle, genetically speaking. We lose biodiversity as a result of those kind of things, and we provide opportunities for new things to sneak in here, invasive species. From the tires or the transportation working through there can infect these areas. And so as a result, if you look at wilderness areas, most of them have regulations that don't allow for roads to be constructed or even utilized. And so, our example up here in Cloud Peak, they don't allow roads to go anywhere inside the wilderness area at all. So, when they want to cut down trees, there's really three techniques that are used for that: selective cutting, clear cutting, and strip cutting. Clear cutting is this one right here. Just take them all off, cut everything down. Now, the problem with that is it creates a ton of erosion. So if you look at a stream down here, the stream is all full of eroded soil. Trees aren't going to grow back if you remove all the topsoil through erosion. So clear cutting is really devastating for the environment. But it's used because it's very economically sound from a perspective of amount of money and time and effort versus how much profit you get to make. So this one's preferred to use for economic reasons, but it's really lousy for the environment. The other two, selective and strip cutting, are better for the environment, but they're not as cost effective. And so selective cutting is that I go in and I trim out just the old mature trees, leaving the younger ones to fill in as we go. This reduces erosion significantly and helps the environment out in a variety of ways. Strip cutting is basically clear cutting in little sections. So just take a strip along the contour of the land and cut it out. It is better than clear cutting by itself, but in many ways you could argue not as good as selective cutting, because this part of the forest can still become unhealthy. And so we want to balance between those. So here's a look at selective cutting. So here's the strengths of it. Mature trees can be harvested from a diverse forest, which is nice. The younger trees then are left to grow and harvest in place. So if you look at these trees, see the big mature trees being taken out, cut down, leaving by the other ones so they can grow. This reduces crowding, which is not healthy in forests. It takes away diseased trees if there's a problem and allows younger ones to grow faster and stronger. Clear cutting. Clear cutting is what I just talked about. This is when you remove all of the species, all of the trees that are present. It has advantages. High yield of timber, can get a lot out really fast. Maximize profits in short amount of time. You can put new trees in that you want, fast growing trees that will grow back twice as quickly. And if you want to put in trees that need a lot of sunlight, this is a good choice. But bad things, no biodiversity afterwards typically. It fragments all the wildlife that live in those forests. It increases pollution and flooding and erosion, and it takes away the aesthetics and recreation from the area. So these are pictures of that exact thing in action. You can see how this has just come in and they've just removed all of this stuff. And you can even see where the erosion is starting to prevail here in these areas, and that's a dangerous world to live in. Again, getting clear cutting. Over here, this is a boundary between two different states and how they handle that management. Healthy forests managed by one country and completely removed by the other one. Okay, strip cutting is the last one. Remember, we cut along the contour of the land here. And so we put in a dirt road and we cut up one way and down the other way and haul it to the road, and can haul the way pretty quickly. So it's a little bit more cost effective, which is nice. It has far less erosion involved in it than does clear cutting, but there's that balance between there. And then again, there's still lots of debris and clogging in those old sections. What else are issues within this whole thing? Well, forest fires are a big problem, potentially. But they have both benefits and drawbacks to them within the forest world. So forests need fire. Fire is important. And the reason why fire is important is there's lots of debris and stuff on the ground of forests, and a good fire will come in and remove all of this excess debris down here. It doesn't usually hurt the trees at all. It might scorch the bark a little bit at the bottom, but the trees don't usually get hurt at all. So these are ground fires, and so that burn away the flammable ground stuff. This prevents larger, more destructive fires from happening by cleaning this out continuously. It provides nutrients and recycles those into the soil, and it can stimulate new growth. There are many trees out there, like a jack pine, for instance, that the cone only releases the seed and starts to create new pine trees if it's been in the fire. So those are important parts. When we get into burning the whole tree is when we have problems. And so we need to separate fires out into two categories. There's surface fires and there's crown fires. Surface fires, good for the environment. They burn along the ground. They burn up the leaf litter and the undergrowth. They provide food for vegetation in the future. They sprout new stuff. So surface fires are usually pretty good to have. By contrast, crown fires are when the tops of trees, the whole forest is just being decimated. Extremely hot. It destroys all the trees, jumps from top of tree to top of tree. They can't be controlled. They're intense and crazy. These ones are the ones we want to avoid. Those are the bad fires out there. In addition to that, there's invasive species issues at work. So here's some blister stuff, different diseases, pine beetles, that kind of stuff. These are some invasive species that are having huge impacts on forest regions around the United States. And you can see, for instance, that pine blister thing that's a problem here. We also have pine beetles in this region. So there's lots of things that are having major threats to forests in the area. Pine beetles are a very common one around here. So, human activities. This is astounding to me, we've almost lost half of the forests on the planet. We have been hacking the trees to the ground. And so we need to be careful because they are such a vital part of how the Earth's biosphere works that we have to be careful how we treat them. Deforestation is the temporary or permanent removal of trees. And so the amount of deforestation we have to worry about, we need to pay attention to, and we have to do it in a sustainable way. Unsustainable tree cutting is not a healthy choice for us in our futures. So why? Where is this happening? Well, most of this cutting down is happening in developing countries where there's not regulations and taking care of that, maintaining those issues, and a lot of it's just being used and burned for food and cooking. So we have to be aware of that and get a hold of it. In tropical forests are being cut down for that, as well as grazing and things like that. So Latin America, Indonesia, and Africa, there's a lot of tropical forests being lost. And then the boreal forests of Alaska, Canada, Scandinavia, and Russia are also being cut down. Some of these are for logging. Like in Alaska, logging is a very common reason why it gets cut down. Canada is the same way. Third world countries, it's for basic food and heating. So cutting down all these things, what kind of problems is it creating? Well, it's decreasing soil fertility because we have erosion. It's creating that runoff into aquatic systems, which is messing up how they function and has too much turbidity in the water, for instance. We're getting extinction of populations, loss of habitat for natural species like birds and butterflies. We're changing the climate in certain areas. We're messing with CO2 levels and we're messing with flooding levels. So we have to be careful about it. This is a picture of tropical rainforest illustrating that exact point. How much has already been altered, and this is from 1975 to 2001. So in 25 years, look how much of the tropical rainforest, and this is a satellite image, has been cut down, cleared out in a very rapid way. Moving on with that, tropical forests are disappearing rapidly. Here are the major ones. The closest one to us in Mexico, they're losing much forest very quickly. Cut down for expansion and management of different things. Brazil and Argentina are also doing it quite a bit in the Americas. And then over in Africa, but you can see all of these are concentrated in third world countries. So we need to pay attention to that and take care of it a little bit. I'll talk more about tropical rainforests coming up here in just a second.